at the London Borough of
Sorry,
Redbridge.
hang on, wait. I'm just going to stop you there. We're now live. Do you mind to start again? Because now people are coming in.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at this Fabian Fringe event, getting young women engaged in local politics. This is something that me and Emily are really passionate about because we think that there are some amazing women who'd be great councillors, and they just either face barriers or they don't feel like they would make good councillors. So we're so pleased to be joined by some great female councillors today. I'm Amy Dwyer, I'm the North West Women's Officer for the Young Fabians, and I'm really excited to be chairing this event alongside Emily.
Hello everyone, I am Emily and I am the Young Fabians National Women's Officer.
So throughout the event, you'll be able to ask any questions through the Q&A box, so make sure that you send them in, and we'll be asking them at the end of the session. So we're joined by some fabulous speakers today. We have Kelly Grehan, who's a councillor for Dartford Borough Council, and she currently holds the position of Deputy Shadow Leader of the Council. She's also a Director of 50/50 Parliament and on the Fabian Women's Network Committee. We're also joined by Vanesha Solanki, who's a Labour councillor at the London Borough of Redbridge. She's currently serving as the Secretary of Redbridge Labour Group and previously served as Chair of Birmingham Labour Students. We also have Shama Tatler, who's a Labour councillor in the London Borough of Brent and serves as Cabinet Member for Regeneration, Property and Planning. Prior to her full-time cabinet role, Shama was a history teacher for 10 years, holding the position of Head of History and Head of Humanities. And last but not least, we have McQuillan, who's a Labour councillor for Bethnal Green, and she serves as Cabinet Member for Planning and Social Inclusion, which is a job share at the Tower Hamlets Borough Council, which she leads on planning. So there's so much we want to talk about, so we're going to go to Kelly first to talk about her experiences as a woman in local politics.
Hi Amy, can you see me? Am I coming in? Yep. So firstly, thank you for inviting me to this event. I think it's a really important event and it's something that I feel very passionate about like you do. So I'll explain a bit about my journey to being a local councillor. So my granddad was a local councillor when he was retired. So I very much had an image of councillors as being older gentlemen. And I think it's something I thought I might do when I was retired. Once I had children, I was, like a lot of women, I got involved in things like NCT committees, PTAs, and then I became a school governor. So it was sort of a natural link to me to then become more and more involved with the Labour Party. And at the same time, I was running quite a lot of community initiatives and quite a lot of community projects in my spare time. So it was quite a natural thing to get involved in local politics more. So I found myself going down that avenue. What I did find, and what I continue to find, is that a lot of things that women done are kind of diminished as experiences when actually they're vitally important. So things like running a play group or being treasurer of a mums and babies group or any of those sort of things are really massively important things that women can bring as skills, and they're often not recognised. And then I hear similar kind of things that a man might do, like being the treasurer of the I don't know, the fishing club or something, spoke about as great skills. So I think that's something interesting. And what I continually find is that women do not recognise the skills they've got to bring to local government. Now, local government benches are very unequal in terms of the demographic upon them. So 34% of councillors are women, so that's a really small number. And I was 38 when I became a councillor, which sounds to me like quite old to start something in many respects, but as a councillor, I'm practically a teenager because the number of councillors under 45 is just 15%. So we've got an absolutely tiny number of women that are under 45 on councils. And I think that shows in a lot of the decisions councils make, because what you tend to get is a lot of people over 60, which, you know, is great. I'm not saying we don't want older people on councils, but what we really need is a mix, because actually it's women that use the most council services of any group, particularly young women, and it's younger women that are in touch with youth services, women's services, health services, education. All those sort of things are led by women within the community. It's women that primarily fight for those services. So it's absolutely madness that then on councils we have people with very little experience of them. And what I could think tends to happen is when you get a lot of people that have experiences of services, so they're talking about, well, I use maternity services or I used schools, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They all, because they've all had similar experiences, they all think those experiences are quite relevant, and actually sometimes they're quite dated experiences. So we really need a better parity of people of different ages, and particularly women on the benches. to really bring those stories to the forefront and to show people to fight for those services that we know that women and young women need, because they're completely neglected in a lot of councils. Just look at my other notes. What I would say about being, what I think puts a lot of women off standing for council is, one, there isn't a lot of role modelling of women in councils. So often, because we've got so few particularly leaders of councils that are women, people don't see it as something that women do, which is massively unfortunate and massively needs to change. But also, you know, it'll be disingenuous not to pretend that the experience of women in councils is often very different to men. So women experience a lot of trolling online, women experience a lot more abuse, and the sort of systems of politics are not really set up for the reality of a lot of women's lives. So for example, my CLP, we have meetings of a Friday night, which is just madness for most people. It makes it very difficult. And council meetings, of course, are mostly in the evening and mostly very difficult for people with caring responsibilities to attend. So what I'm really hoping is that the changes we've seen lately, with a lot of meetings being on Zoom, can be kind of continued, at least for some people, in the future. And I've spoken to a lot of women during the pandemic, particularly in my roles with 50/50 and FWN, who say that actually the lockdown, as hard as it's been, has been a positive experience for them, because it's brought them opportunities to get involved in politics, because there's a massive difference between logging on or having to travel to meetings, which, you know, are disproportionately in London, or if they're council meetings, are very difficult to get childcare for late at night, or you know, clash with study responsibilities and so on. So I'm hoping that we see some changes when the pandemic's over, and that some of the good stuff that has come on board during this period is continued with. What I would say to any woman thinking of getting involved in politics is sister yourself up. So find other women that are interested in politics, absolutely get involved with Young Fabians and FWN and all those other things, because I really think it's so difficult to be involved in politics without other women bigging you up. And you know, we still find, as far as we've come in the Labour Party, that we've now got gender parity in Parliament. We're a long way from getting it on the council benches, and I think that's a massive a problem that we really need to get on with solving, something we really need to make a difference with. So the thing I'll finish on before we go on to the next speaker is, anybody who knows a woman who would be good on a council, maybe they're not, maybe they're interested in the Labour Party, maybe they're sort of in the shadows of it, speak to that woman and ask her to stand, because what we absolutely know is that women need to stand, women need to be asked at least 3 times before they'll consider standing, whereas most men, once they're asked, will sign up to stand and will get on with it straight away. So we need to give women the confidence to recognise that the skills women have are disproportionately better as council skills than a lot of men, and are lacking. So that's my advice to anyone. Think about standing. Find other women that have stood and speak to them, and, you know, give it a go, because I'm absolutely certain that most women I speak to in politics will be fantastic councillors.
That's great, thank you, Kelly. I think that's a really important point about having to tell women 3 times before they have the confidence to stand. I think men maybe wouldn't even have to be told at all, they just go for it. So I think that's a really important point. Vanesha, are you okay to talk about your time in local politics and what inspired you to become involved?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear me all right? Perfect. So I actually got involved in politics quite early on. It was actually when I was at university that I got very actively involved in becoming the chair of Birmingham University Labour students. And I'd always campaigned for councillors that I knew, always knew that maybe that was something that I could do. But like Kelly said, when I'd always walked into a council room or council chamber, I just felt like there was no space, you know, for anyone a young person like me. So that's when I thought, is this a space actually open for young people? Is this a place where we can actually have a platform? Because a lot of the time you already feel very unheard as a woman anyway, but to even think about, you know, consider yourself as you're putting yourself forward for a position like that, you actually think a lot of times, and you have a lot of self-doubt, because you think, can I do this, can I not? Because as they say, there's a lot of lack of experience, in the sense that there is nobody tells you, you know, how you put an application form in. Nobody tells you, you know, how you know, address an interview panel. Nobody tells you all of these different steps. It's really, really important that we actually think about these things differently, especially going forward. You know, politics needs to be accessible for all women. More now than ever, I think, especially in these testing times as well. I think we need to realise that, you know, as Kelly said, if we actually have Zoom meetings rather than meetings in person, it would actually make it a lot more accessible. So even when I was, you know, the chair of my Labour students at university, I was trying to see how do we actually engage our young people in politics? Because a lot of them, unfortunately, nowadays especially, don't actually care very much about politics. How can we make it resonate for them? How can we actually make it resonate for all young women who do want to stand? And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is actually to having a little bit of belief in the system, and actually, you know, backing yourself up, because nobody else is going to do that for you. Unfortunately, you have to do that yourself. And it's also about finding a mentor, you know, finding a buddy that will always believe in you, will always support you, especially through those ups and downs and those hurdles in council life. Or when you're even just applying, I think a lot of the times, you know, before even thinking of applying, we think about all of the obstacles and the hurdles before we even start putting our application together. So I think finding a buddy in that process is really, really important. And then I think when you're running as well, I think nobody tells you, nobody told me, like, you know, I was running at the age of 22, had no idea what it'd be like, was quite concerned because obviously it takes up a lot of your time. I was still trying to work, get my first job straight out of uni, and work, you know, doing this fully fledged campaign because the seat that I ran for was always a Tory seat. So we overturned it for the first time in 2018, and those are things that, you know, we do have to actually also appreciate the small wins. I think a lot of the time women often don't do this enough. I think men do it a lot, you know, they'll celebrate the small wins straight away. But I think as women, we don't do it enough. I think after every small win, we should actually sit back and appreciate the moment, because those moments really, really do count, especially when you're, you know, whether it be, you know, winning your seat in the local election, whether it be doing, you know, standing up in the council chamber to do your maiden speech, all of those things actually matter. And I think we do need to empower more women to come forward. But I think the way to do that is actually making it a lot more accessible. But it's also about making it resonate with them. You know, we've seen women come forward by actually having an idea. A lot of them don't know that it's possible, for example. You know, when I first ran for council, I didn't really think, was this something I could do? Because nobody had put it out there that, you know, this is something you can run for. And I think we need to make sure that there are those services in place. And I think the Labour Party needs to do more in that terms, or in that respect, where they should be putting out, you know, whether it be a buddy system, whether it be some sort of guidance, whether it be like a presentation or something like that, to talk you through those steps that are really, really, really critical. And even in the council, you know, it was really, really amazing to see so many women supporting each other. I think that's one thing we need to continue to do, support one another, you know, actually be there for one another. When someone's feeling a little bit low, you know, ask them how they are. It could be as simple as that, but it could actually go a long way. But that's something that I think, you know, with terms of obstacles, I think it is that second guessing yourself a lot, and not knowing actually this is something that we can do well in. And I think we need to actually move forward in that terms and actually make sure that the women that we are putting forward and the women that are interested in politics actually know how to get more involved. Because it doesn't have to always be, you know, becoming a councillor. It could be as simple as going out campaigning, going out canvassing, going out door knocking. So I think when we talk about getting involved in, especially getting more young women involved in local politics, it doesn't always have to be becoming a councillor. I think there are always different means. But I'd just like to say to any, you know, young women that are out there is, you know, continue to believe in yourself and keep pushing those hurdles, because nobody else is going to do that for you. You have to do that yourself. And I think you need to make sure, you know, that belief never goes away. But yeah, that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That was really, really inspiring. I think that the idea of a buddy system would be really effective, whether it's just like pairing up women who are running for the first time with women who are already council leaders. I think that would go a long way to addressing the issue of confidence. So Shama, are you okay to touch on your experiences of being a woman in local politics?
Hi, thanks, and thanks everyone, and welcome to everyone who's come this evening. So I suppose a little bit about myself and then my journey, and then a little bit of what I think we could do more as a party, as a movement, to encourage women to get involved in politics at all different levels. So I came late to the party. Actually, I only joined really I joined party in 2011. I was always politically engaged. I was a Labour voter. Watched Question Time every week, passionate about that, went on the march, go and march and so on, but I was never a party member. And I really only joined, and my whole career path was teaching and education. I loved what I did. I loved working with young people. I was a secondary school teacher, and particularly in those more deprived communities, inner city schools. I used to teach in Birmingham and in Stoke, and then more recently back in London. And some of the conversations I had was particularly, I loved teaching young women who often looked like me, or from ethnic groups, who actually had not just added complication of being a woman, but also, let me phrase that, it's not a complication being a woman, let me start that. The added, I suppose, work, a constant issue around kind of battling, getting opportunity because you're a woman, but also the added fact to the conversation that you're an ethnic woman from a minority community. And quite often for these young women that I used to teach, it used to be, I was very different. I left home at 18 to go to university. I didn't move back home. I married the boyfriend I lived with. So my experiences are very different and actually I really enjoyed those conversations I used to have with the young women that I used to teach. But the reason I joined Labour really and joined the party was Michael Gove and how he shaped and changed education and changed, well, essentially was why I joined, became a teacher. And in my journey within the party, I've been very lucky actually, and I don't often take no for an answer, and that's primarily because when I was 17 and I had a careers advisor at school, I wanted to go into law and become a barrister, and the careers advisor said to me, well, actually you might want to rethink that because you're a woman and you're brown. And I had that experience at 17 as I was applying for university. And that sunk and that stayed with me, and that still drives me today, because actually I'm thinking I let that affect my choices at that point. I'm not going to accept that anymore. So I use my elbows to get into the room and push into the room where it is for all men, and particularly middle-aged white men. And I'll say that in this forum. But I became a CLP chair. I stood as a candidate for Brent Council, and I was lucky enough to be elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2018. Became a cabinet member for Regeneration in 2016, and I've stayed in that portfolio since. And as a result, we are now building the most council housing in London, and since under my tenure, which is a really proud achievement. And I'm very lucky that my leader actually is very pro getting women ahead. He won't have gender inequality on the cabinet. We now have a majority women cabinet, which is great. And we've all got the big portfolios: environment, regen, housing, community safety, and finance. So we've all got the big portfolios, very front facing. And it's been a really interesting journey for me in terms of how women are treated. So being a younger Asian woman, it's a particular experience that we have, that I'm battling not only kind of gender issues, but also issues from my own community who don't quite understand why I'm in politics and why I speak up. Also, I think I'm a single mum, and I'm of a young girl who's 11, very impressionable, and I want to empower her to be able to use and not pull the ladder up. I'm very conscious that any young women coming through into the council, we leave the door open, we mentor, we support them through. And I think that's one of the things I want to reiterate today, is those of us already in the door and already in the room, leave the door open and help other women through in that conversation, because that's the only way we're going to get representation and make the meaningful change. And one of the things I think is really important is that politics isn't just about getting elected. There are really different avenues that you can use to get into politics. So Mums for Lungs, for example, I'm doing a lot of work with them under Active Travel, are a really fantastic campaign group that are promoting active, safer, greener travel. And they've been a phenomenal campaign group. And I think that's every avenue you can take it. I was very lucky enough and fortunate enough to be a mentee on the Fabian Women's Network mentoring scheme, cohort 3. So it's a while back now, because I think we're in cohort 10 now. And it changed my life, because I've got a group of women who are I'm still friends with 7 years on. And it's a safe space. It's a safe conversation. We may not all always politically agree, but it's a safe space and a very supportive space. And I encourage women that if you can get onto those kind of schemes, whether it's Fabian's or whether it's Labour Women's Network, go onto it, because women are generally very supportive of one another. And seek out help and seek out advice, because I've never said to anyone, don't come to me for advice, and I'm happy to do that. And one of the really great experiences I've had recently is that within Regen, we have to do estate ballots on our estate Regen schemes. And one of the most empowering things I've seen, and one of the most inspiring things I've seen, is a group of Somali mums who want to change for their community. They don't normally get involved in activities. They don't normally get involved in politics. But because this was because this ballot was hugely going to affect their lives, they campaigned together in their own communities with WhatsApp groups. And they were empowering each other to making sure that each other were voting when the ballots dropped, and really engaged. And actually, that's one message I want to really get across, that politics doesn't have to mean getting elected to a position in local government or Westminster. It can mean single issue things that make a real difference to people's lives. And I think that's really important, that we as women need to think about, where is it we can make the difference? Is it politics within big P in Westminster, or is it politics in small p as a trustee of a charity that's doing some brilliant campaign work? There are so many different avenues that we can lend our skills to and our skill sets. And in my own experiences, I was single mum, teacher, I was a carer to my late husband at the same time, and a counsellor. And we all know that women can multitask and do things brilliantly together, and it's championing one another to make sure that we get to that point. And men are very good at putting themselves forward when they haven't got nearly half the skill set that we have. And I think it's make sure that we empower each other. And one last statistic I'll leave you with as I kind of close up here is that only 1 in 5 women, only 1 in 5 council leaders are women. Now, if we really want to change and make change differently at local level, that's where we need to make changes at local level. Westminster's one level, local government makes huge difference. If we're talking about social care, we're talking about even pavements and potholes and how we do schooling and all the rest of it, which really affects us on a day-to-day life, getting involved with local government. And that's really where I think I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thank you for that contribution. It's disappointing to hear that people in positions of power, especially careers advisors, would hold those views and try to hold young women, especially young women of colour, down. It's incredibly disappointing, but it's great to hear stories of women coming together. And I think when women do come together, no one can stop us. Not Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, no one. So Eve, we'd love to hear from you about why you became a counsellor and what you think are the main barriers to women getting more involved.
Super, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's shared loads of really useful information, useful thoughts there. So I think for me, I always say that I became a counsellor accidentally. I joined the Labour Party in 2016, and I was kind of involved with the Sadiq Khan campaign, but I hadn't really thought about being a counsellor at all. And then I had a really horrible, sorry, I don't think I can turn myself up. Better. Yeah. Okay. So I had a really horrible experience at the hospital, which was really abusive and awful and really disempowering and very political. And my counsellor at the time, who I knew a little bit, helped me out loads. And even though she didn't fix the problem, she made me feel that I had control over the problem and that it was legitimate that I was saying, actually, this is wrong. And I think that experience was so kind of like, it really taught me the importance of advocacy and standing up for people and being stood up for when you're in that situation, and really kind of encouraged me to run. So I wasn't kind of, it then kind of got onto my radar, and then there were just several people within our local Labour Party who were like, why don't you run? Why don't you run? And for God's sake, if you don't, who else is going to do it? And then eventually I did end up running, and I got elected in 2018. And I think one of the most important thing about having women councillors and young women councillors is that when you have been treated really badly by housing, by adult social care, by you've not got the domestic violence services that you need, whatever the problem is, you have somebody who you can talk to who perhaps doesn't understand and have your exact lived experience, but who can kind of not explain, but kind of work with you to understand that it is about power and it is about gender and it is about politics, even if it's not necessarily about parliamentary politics. It's about the politics in day-to-day stuff. And I think that's why it's really important to get more and more women councillors. In terms of what we can do to make things better, because, you know, frankly, my local Labour Party has some fantastic, wonderful, inspiring activists, and it also has some terrible behaviour that would be acceptable in no friendship group and no workplace. And I think that there's so much stuff that happens that if you did that at work, you would get fired. And I think, so for me, the big ones are we need to get to a place where we communicate with each other as if we kind of have an assumption that people are coming to an issue in good faith, whether we agree about it or not. Our Labour colleagues, regardless of what faction they are in the party, are not somehow kind of like bad, nasty people. We need to stop assuming that they are. We need to make sure that we credit women for women's work. I think we need to really, when a woman does something great, we need to stop saying it's a team effort. We need to say that woman did a really great job, because I see so often men say, oh, fantastic, thank you, not realising they're doing it, and actually that woman is then kind of, her kind of influence and achievements are being brushed aside, and that really, you know, has to stop. And that is very achievable, but we just need to kind of like think about it as it's happening. And then the other thing is, when we kind of running our campaigns, running our meetings, you need to stop pushing the women into the boring jobs, because we this has to get done, nobody wants to do it. Well, after a while somebody's going to feel awkward and do it eventually, and that 9 times out of 10 in my experience and anyway ends up being a woman. And that is just about how we, as like a party, as a kind of community within a party, think about how we organise time, and just think about those things. Those kind of 3 things I think would have made a massive difference to my experience, and are all kind of very achievable. I think Vanesha was absolutely spot on when she was talking about mentorship. I've been so lucky to have several kind of fantastic women mentors, people who probably don't even realise that they're mentoring someone, by kind of having their door always open. And I think taking that approach to doing politics is absolutely crucial. And I think for me now, when we're looking at who's going to be running in the next elections in 2022, I think my kind of challenge to myself, I suppose, is to kind of like push harder to try and find other women who are interested, particularly other young women. We've had a brilliant, our women's officer set up a fantastic shadow councillor scheme for women, which I think was a kind of really important for getting people thinking about what it actually meant to be a councillor. I think we need to do a lot more of that.
That's great. Thanks so much, Eve. That's so interesting to hear everyone's different perspectives and all. I mean, I think most of the panelists touched upon the importance of peer support and networking, and really having that support behind you to give you that confidence that sometimes we feel like, well, maybe I'm just talking for myself, we're not naturally born with, and you have that imposter syndrome that you're thinking that maybe you're not good enough, and really having that sister support there is really helpful in sort of overcoming that and bridging that and faking it until you make it, or you somehow gain the confidence. I don't know, it's still a process for lots of women, but 50/50 Parliament, in their schemes that they do to ask women to stand, and in their support schemes in that process, they do provide women with a peer support and a body in that sense. So I'd really encourage women to look at that scheme and the work that 50/50 does. I would just like to thank all the panelists for their amazing contributions, and just say that we're going to turn to the Q&A section now. There's been a question from Sophie Connor, and it says, what would be your advice on balancing a councillor job with another full-time or part-time job? I think this is a massive obstacle for women who also may have childcare responsibilities, caring responsibilities, even, you know, just like mental health problems. There's loads of different things that can stop a woman just going for it. And I would be really interested to hear what the panelists think about the barriers in that sense and what they would recommend. If you'd like to go first.
Yeah, Stay on top of your emails would be my big thing. Do a bit every day. And I think set barriers as well. When I first, where I represent in Bethnal Green, there's lots of vulnerable people. We have a huge street homelessness problem, and I get people coming into my surgery and calling me up who've got really difficult lives. And I think when I first got elected, I didn't quite understand how to set barriers, and that it wasn't, you know, it was okay for me to kind of like turn my phone off on a Friday night or not answer the phone if I was out with a friend or that kind of thing. So I think that's setting those barriers about your time, keeping on top of stuff. And I think really setting your key priorities about what you want to achieve actually, and what issues you want to work on and you want to push and what you want to champion, and saying no to things that you don't have to be at every event. You can kind of decide the counsellor that you want to be. For me, when I first got elected, getting on top of my casework and doing my casework really well was the thing that was really important to me. For other people, it's not that. For other people, it's running a campaign issue, whatever it is. So I think finding what your key priority is and like pushing at that would be the focus.
Thank you, Eve. Kelly?
I think it's interesting that this is a question that comes up a lot, and I often find that it comes from women rather than men. Just speaking for myself, I've got a full-time job. I've got 2 children, and I often get asked, does my husband mind me being out so often and things like that? But what I think tends to happen for any women is when you take on more, you just get more done. I can't really explain how I do it, and now in lockdown where I've been doing less, I think, like, I don't know where I found all the hours from before, but you just kind of do it. It's the same when you have children. You think, how am I ever going to manage work and children? But you do, and it somehow or another it does. You just find a way. And I know that's not really helpful advice, but it's just the truth. One way or another, you just find a way to accommodate it, because when it's something you're passionate about, it just works itself out.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And Vanesha?
I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said, but I think it also comes down to having a good relationship with your employer. Just, you know, making them understand, or them having a good understanding that actually you have to have a set time where you do need to rush off the council meetings or rush off the meetings with your residents. And I think that's really, really important. And the other thing I'll just add is just actually not burning yourself out. I think we all, as women, just tend to do so much all at once. I think it's really important that we don't burn ourselves out, and we actually do give some time to ourselves to reflect, to understand, you know, what can we do now, what's important, what's pressing for now, what you can do later, which I think is really, really important too.
Definitely. I think that's something I can imagine when we all take on so much, we all want to do so much, we're all passionate about so much. Sometimes you've just got to think what is actually possible without sort of jeopardizing your own health and your own mental well-being. Definitely. And Shama?
Yeah, so it's similar to what the others have said, really. I mean, I think at one point, like I said earlier, I was a carer, teacher, mother and counsellor in one full swoop. And I think as women, we're very good at multitasking and prioritising, and I think that's great. I think what we're not always particularly good on is not taking on too much and not being able to say no, and some self-care as well. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really advocating is around mental health and making sure that you have time to switch off, time to reflect, and time to kind of focus on other things that aren't politics or isn't work. I mean, like, part of the and I've learned this really recently, in the sense that I'm standing for the NEC, and I didn't quite realise how big of a campaign and kind of what it takes out of you in terms of the social media presence, and so asking yourself the question, what is it that you want to achieve on social media? Because that in itself is a whole another piece of work. So it's understanding what you want to say yes to, what is it you want to achieve, and remember prioritizing self-care, because you are only going to be as good as how healthy and what kind of mindset you are in as well. And you're only going to benefit your residents or your workload or your family if you're well yourself. So one of the things that I really struggled with over the last couple of years is my anxiety, and to the point where I've had anxiety attacks, to the point where, you know, and And it's all because I take it upon a lot of it upon myself rather than sharing the work, because I feel if I'm doing a piece of work or a piece of casework, I want to see it to the end. I want to make sure it's done properly, because part of I'm not trusting other people. And I think that's the ability that we as women need to do more of, is sharing what is it you can do and how you can share some of that workload and look after yourself a little bit more. And also I think on a practical level, making sure that your council has good care allowance, childcare allowance. So my council, I'm able to tap into childcare allowance if I need to, because a lot of times that can be an issue, the financials can be an issue. Maternity allowance or paternity allowance, I think a lot of councils are now bringing that on. So making sure you've got the support networks within your constitution of your council as well to support you in the role. And that's something that you should be able to tap into, and it should be something that's difficult to pass through. And I know the LGA Labour group are supporting councils to enable that, to change that in their constitution. And even accessibility, so asking your CLPs to have meetings a little bit earlier. 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening does not work for me as a single mum. It's really hard, so I'm battling still, saying actually, can we bring it earlier, at least 7 o'clock, so that way I'm done by the evening at 8:30. But a full day at council, it is wearing, and I want to still, have some sleep. So it's about the party changing some of its structures as well. So I think it's about how we collectively ask for those changes, but also a lot of self-care.
Yeah, definitely. I can only like agree that my CLP meets on a Thursday really late as well. I think it's 8 until whenever they finish, and it's just, you think, I can't be the only one finding this a problem, and let alone, I mean, I don't have children, I can't even imagine what that is like to have to juggle all those different things. The next question is from Nafisa, and it's about other ways you can engage in politics. So I think we briefly talked about this, and that I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for Amy, but we have a chat when we were planning this event about how, the main focus is getting women involved in Westminster, which is obviously so important. We can all agree on that. But I also think there's so many other ways that women, young women especially, can get involved locally, whether that be through a councillor in local politics, but also in other ways. And I would just be really interested to see if there are any initiatives you could suggest, or any positions that you personally had experience with that you would be able to advise women to go for, just to sort of see how they fit into local politics and their own passions. Kelly?
Well, I just think it's a timely thing to quote here Ruth Badger Ginsburg, because she said women belong in all the places where decisions are being made, and that is so true. And you're absolutely right, people do think of Westminster when they think of places to go and do politics. But I would really advise anyone that's thinking about any of these things to think about becoming a school governor. There's a shortage of school governors nationally, and it's really good practice for committee kind of work and being involved in the local community. But also there's so many other things like trustees for charities. And again, young people are massively missing from charity trustee boards. It's a great type of voluntary work to be doing, and a really great way to be supporting really great things going on in your community. Also things like fostering panels, really beneficial for them to have younger people on them again. So anything like that, especially if it has any personal experience of, have a look at the organisations involved in that and see if there's an angle that they need people on their board or their trustees or whatever it is, and have a go. Also, if you're in a CLP where there isn't kind of a young Labour or a young Fabians group in your area, think about setting one up. And I really wish that when I was younger I had got involved in things like Young Fabians, Young Labour much earlier. So I would definitely advise looking at those things. And I think the thing that holds a lot of us back is we worry about running for positions and not getting them, and that it feels like a failure, but it really isn't. I would say go for things, give them a go, and it's all experience you're building up of running. So yeah, just give things a go. There's so much out there, and we shouldn't just think of politics as what we do within chambers of Westminster or council. There's so much more to being a political activist.
Thank you, Kelly. Shama?
Yeah, so I think building on what's already been said, I think school governors is a great avenue to take locally. I think depending on what your commitment is, the residents associations are a really great way of kind of doing some local community work, getting involved in there, and also then you can have contact with your local councillors if you don't want to be a councillor yourself. Recently, the mutual aid groups are a great way of getting involved in your local community. They're very sort of socialist minded, a lot of them. So might be a good way of getting involved and doing some voluntary work. And I think if you've got a specific skill set in a particular profession, it may be worth tapping into your local, your council scrutiny group, where they've got task groups where they're looking for particular expertise in the local area that can help. So we had one recently about clean air and one about poverty commission. So you've got interest around policy development. There's an element of stuff that you can do there, as well as and actually a lot of councils also do sort of the council meetings enable people to get involved at a full council meeting with questions. If you've got a particular issue or particular question and you want to get a little bit of experience, on an ad hoc way, ask a question of a councillor or a cabinet member of what's going on in your local community. I think there's also a look into other societies. So you've got Fawcett Society, you've got the Fabian Women's Network, you do a lot of great events through the year that you don't have to have a continual commitment to, but actually an ad hoc way of getting involved. And then you build up the support network, and then you can start your own stuff. So they're the things that I would suggest there's an avenue in.
Great, thank you, Shama. Vanesha?
I would say youth council. I don't think a lot of people know that, you know, you can in youth council. I think it's really important, especially if you're a young person looking to get into politics, or, you know, just interested in it. It's a great way to actually boost your platform and actually just meet, you know, like-minded people. I'd also say maybe your unions as well, if that's something you're interested in, and actually joining a union is really, really important, especially if you're going into work as well. So that might be, you know, union meetings are important. So something like that could be really, really important as well. And then obviously Young Labour. I think Young Labour is really important in terms of how you can get to places. For example, I was chair of my Labour students at university, and I was also the Women's Officer for Redbridge Young Labour. So it also just gives you that balance of, you know, you're meeting people that are interested in politics, who would like to, you know, maybe make that step into going into a council role or even becoming an MP. And I think those are really great platforms as well to boost their careers, but also boost your confidence. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Vanesha. And Eve as well. Anything?
Oh yeah, well, you guys said literally anything.
Yeah.
So I think the last thing for me to say is I think before I joined the Labour Party, I was involved in lots of different campaigns. And so it's those campaigns that exist outside the Labour Party. So I was involved in Amnesty International when I was a student. I campaigned to try and close down immigration detention centres. I was involved in women's campaigning for saving domestic violence services when I first moved to London. It's all those kind of things. It doesn't have to be through the Labour Party or in a structured way. There are all sorts of fantastic campaigns going on, and I think it's about kind of like recognizing that there's, like, in a very kind of informal way, a real kind of like skill set that you learn through doing that, and a real way that you kind of like learn to work together in a kind of teamworky way to get stuff done, but in a way that it just definitely isn't like one person forcing their will, which I don't think happens in many other spaces actually. So yeah, using those opportunities to get involved in those campaigns, whatever you're passionate about, what matters to you.
Great, that's great. Our next question is from Hilary in the chat, and she says, a lot of women feel daunted by the amount of local knowledge required to be a counsellor. Did you find you were able to learn on the job, or what can women do to educate themselves before running? Does anyone want to jump in with that? Yeah, Shama?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I knew my local area because I'd grown up here and then gone away and lived back and come and gone away and then moved back. And what you learn as a counsellor, you'll never stop learning. So my advice would be, when you're a counsellor, don't feel that you have to know everything straight away. If a resident comes to you and says, I need help with A, B, and C, it's okay to say, let me go find out about this. I'm not certain. That's fine to say that. Residents don't always expect you to know everything off the cuff, and actually get involved in a lot of times as a counsellor, or you will get trained, you'll get training sessions, you'll get information about your local area, and speak to other experienced counsellors as well. And that's what I would say. And then just take the opportunity when you can to get involved in things with local residents groups, with local community groups, and just understand your particular ward. One of the things I did when I first got elected was actually draw a little map of my ward and just kind of in my mind understand what the different parts of my ward are, just so I can get a feeling for what's actually going on in my ward. But I would say tap into the experience and don't feel you have to know everything straight away, because and you never will know everything straight away, and things change. And take on the experience from other people, and enjoy it, and don't feel like you have to get onto the big job straight away. Just be a committee member of a licensing committee, and you will learn so much about your high street or your local bar or the police or whoever, just by being on that committee and reading the papers. So I wouldn't, my point would be, don't stress or worry about not knowing, thinking that you don't know enough, because more often than not, you already know by your campaigning that you know more than most people. So you're just building on that.
That's great. Thanks, Shama. And Eve, I think you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, I think so. This is definitely something that I've faced. I think particularly where I represent, I'm not from Bethnal Green, I'm from Yorkshire. You might be able to hear a little bit. Apparently I've lost the accent. I'm devastated about this. But where I live and in our borough, 25% of the population changes every year. And that is a really important experience that we need to represent in how we deliver our services, because we need to make sure that our services are accessible if you don't have strong community links. So I think not worrying too much, you will absolutely learn on the job, as Shama said, not being afraid to ask questions, but actually recognising that that is useful experience sometimes, because it means that you're like a lot of your residents.
Definitely. I'm just waiting to see if she's coming back. Or does anyone else have anything to add on this? We can go to the next one, maybe. Laura has a really interesting question. She says, as an 18-year-old woman, how can I become a councillor when I feel the current council in my constituency is just not set up for women or change or young people? Like, I can definitely empathise with that. I grew up in Surrey, and the councils there just didn't represent what I felt, who I felt I was, or anything like that. And I think that can be a real barrier in terms of thinking what the councillor job is for you, or how can you get involved in local politics when you only see a certain type of person involved in that. And so I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are, if anyone has any on that. Kelly?
So hearing that is just massively frustrating for me, because this is exactly the problem and why we need more young people on councils. And councils naturally are set up for the people who form the majority on them. So, which, as I said earlier, tends to be older white gentlemen. A good example of this is I brought the baby leave motion, which has been developed by the local government association for mums and parents, dads too, to have time off when they have a baby. And anyone would have thought I suggested something that was very radical rather than something that is the norm in any other workplace. So I think, unfortunately, it is a case of kind of keep fighting the fights all the time. And the only way this is ever going to really change, I sadly feel, is to have more young people on councils. But I would really say the fact that you will be unusual as a young councillor should absolutely not put anyone off. I know it can be very difficult, but please, as I said earlier, find other people that are young councillors or standing for council that are maybe not in your area but other areas, and use them as a support group. And just having you there will make such a difference, and we really need to amplify all of our young councillors nationally, so people are aware of who they are and the great work they do. We've got some fantastic young councillors, as you can see, around the country, so we really need more, and we're only going to make that progress by more people standing. And I think that's why it's on all of us to ask more people to stand and to encourage and support people to do so. I'm sorry if that's not a really helpful answer, but we absolutely need people to break that barrier down.
It's what we need to hear, I think. And Shama, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just two little points really. I think one of the things, just following from what Kelly just said. So I do a lot of work with the local government association, and they do a weekend leadership course for young councillors. It's from 80 to 40. 40 is the cutoff, so I can still count as a young councillor. I'm 38, and I'm quite happily, but I'm not quite young. But that just tells us the issue that actually the average age is too old, and the experiences of young people then don't get translated into policy. So that's one thing I kind of want to bring to light, and I think we need to do some more work within the party to bring that age down. I think Labour is better than most of the parties in terms of the age profile. The other thing I would say is that navigating Labour selections can be quite daunting as well. So understanding what the process is to get onto the panel to then be considered for ward selections. I think it's really making sure that you, in your mind, plan out what is it that where you want to stand, what ward, do you have a connection, then you're reaching out to branch members, but making sure that you understand what your LCF or CLP process is to get onto the panel, how panel interviews work. You've got that kind of in, and then seek advice about if you do get shortlisted, or then the next step is writing a statement, getting somebody to check it over just to make sure that you've caught everything you want to say, having a speech ready for when you're shortlisted, and then don't be afraid to ask people to nominate you. One of the things I've learned recently for the NEC staff is I still find it really daunting to ask somebody to campaign on my behalf. I find that really hard to say, can you help me here to kind of nominate me or promote me? And I find that really difficult. So it's about taking that step a little bit and saying, can you go to your branch meeting and shortlist me, so I can then you're in the room, and then you have the opportunity to convince people, answer questions, and show how talented you are and how good you would be for that ward. And then also don't stop when they say, well, we've had quite often, one of the really frustrating experiences I've had is if it's a 3-member ward or a 2-member ward, one seat always has to be for a woman, which is great because it then guarantees at least a third or a certain percentage of women are going to be candidates. But that doesn't mean that should stop you trying for the other 2 seats. They're open seats, they're not male seats. And that's really important to remember that you can't have a ward or selection that's all women, even if it's not dedicated to all women. And it's something that we all need to get behind as well. So I'd leave it at that.
That's really great to hear. I'll go to Kelly and then Vanesha. I think, Kelly, you popped your hand up earlier, didn't you?
I just wanted to highlight the point that almost half of councillors nationally, 46%, are retired, which is shocking. And as I said earlier, when you get a lot of people that are all from one demographic, you're not learning from each other. I think the councils that are more effective are much more representative. And we know, I think it's something like it's less than 5% of councillors nationally are from BAME groups. Women are, as I said earlier, less than a third. We really need a much bigger pool of people for democracy to work properly, because we're getting such a small pool of experience in a lot of councils that it's the residents that are losing out. So if you don't look like anybody on your council, that's almost, well, that is more reason to go for it. That's exactly what we need, is greater representation, because that's what councils should be about. So if you look at your council and you think there's no one that looks like me, that's a problem with that council, not a problem with you.
And Vanesha?
I would just like to say, it is, as a young person, when I stood, I found it really, really daunting, because you know, nobody tells you how to do anything. Nobody tells you this is how you fill out an application form. And I think it is really about reaching out to people who maybe are already a counsellor or, you know, a mentor of yours, and just asking those questions. And sometimes that is probably the most daunting part, right? Asking those questions. But you'll realise that actually so many people will be willing to help. You know, I think we live in a world where everyone, you know, if you just ask, I think so many people would jump at the opportunity to help. And I think also, as a young person, I think you also forget and you don't realise that everyone deserves a seat at the table. You know, I think especially young people who often are very underrepresented. You know, they don't often get to, we don't see a lot of their policies, you know, come forward. We don't get, you know, even when, you know, Boris is addressing the nation through COVID, where are the young people? There are no young people asking those questions that they want to hear. And I think it's really, really important that that representation is carried forward. I think that the council demographic needs to change. I think that can only happen when we actually push for more young women to get involved in politics. And I think that really comes from actually just making them aware of, this is how you apply, you know, this is what you can do and how you can get to this place. And I think we just need that community effort of making sure everyone, you know, gets that seat and that fair share of the table.
Eve, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the thing for me to add is that I suppose don't forget that you can have allies who come from unlikely places, who are people who back you up, who maybe you would have assumed that they hadn't, or maybe you would have assumed that they weren't interested in listening to you. One of my favourite things about the Labour Party is that it has meant that I now have mates who are pensioners who are great fun. And so don't pigeonhole yourself in terms of the people that you can relate with and you can work with politically.
Yeah, that's great.
They will buy you wine and it's great.
I think this is our last question now. So it's from Cllr, and she says, what would you like to see happen that would remove the barriers for women entering local politics? So maybe, I think it was what you were talking about, Vanesha, about what tangible things could maybe the party put in place, or local councils, things like that, to really enable and facilitate women's engagement in local politics. Who wants to start? Anyone?
You know.
Kelly?
We've highlighted some many great points today. I think the party actually needs to become much more accessible to many different people, and I think that will probably start with having meetings at better times and asking people that don't attend meetings what would help them to attend meetings. And I absolutely personally think that Zoom is a great way to go for a lot of people. Within councils, I think there's lots of things that need to change, and again, I think using technology could be really helpful. As I said earlier, councils are really built for the people who form the majority group on there. So I think those of us that are on councils need to think about ways things can be better. So this might sound a little bit trivial, but I've put a changing mat in our office just to sort of show that there is a space where people are welcome to bring along children and bring along babies. But talking in general, we need to absolutely go and look at what stops people coming, what stops people standing. And I think a lot of it, as we've kind of highlighted today, is that there just isn't a visibility of young women on councils. So that absolutely needs to change. And we need to look at all the sort of things we can bring in, because a lot of people say, I'm not standing for council because I'm intending to have children in the future. Well, sorry, when I say a lot of people, a lot of women say that. So that absolutely needs to change. We need to make council somewhere you can go when you know your life is going to go through changes in the future. So all of those things need to be accommodated. And actually workplaces in general have changed massively in recent times and become more family friendly. So councils absolutely should be the same, should be ahead of those trends rather than tagging years behind, I think.
Definitely. Does anyone have anything else to add? Vanesha?
I think I'd just like to add that the fact that they just need to make the processes a lot easier for when you are running for whether it be a council, an MP, or even any other positions. I think at the moment it is quite black and white, and if you don't get it, you really don't get it. And if you get it, you know, you understand a little bit. And I think they really need to make it clear with whether it be just even putting out a PDF or like a presentation where someone can actually talk you through whether it be going through it to an interview stage, going through the application process, and even social media. You know, a lot of the time, most of the campaigns actually now are run on social media and actually phone banking, because especially you can't, you know, be going out door knocking in these times. I think it's all of that, and I think when you're running for the first time, you don't know a lot of these things. You don't know that, you know, door knocking is such an integral part to actually getting to know your residents, or you don't know phone banking, you know, just having that personal conversation with someone can actually be a lot more effective. And I think those things are really, really important to understand, that actually they frame a lot of the things going forward. So I think a lot more structure just needs to come from the party on how you do things.
Definitely. Eve, did you want to say something quickly? Sorry, we've got 0 minutes, but
Yep.
We'll do it.
I suppose my big thing is, if somebody is behaving badly, don't vote for them. We need to stop saying, oh, that person's really powerful and they can do X, Y, and Z. So even though their behaviour is unacceptable, we have to vote for them. Don't vote for them.
Thank you. And Shama as well.
I think elections are coming up for the elections next year for 2021. We've got elections obviously all the way up until 24. let's make a pledge to all of us that we try and get at least 1 or 2 women standing. You know, let's make a plea and a call to all of us that let's try and encourage over the next few months someone to stand. The more we make ourselves known, and more that we're there present, more likely things are going to change.
I agree with that completely. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone joining us on this call, and a special thank you to all the panelists who took time out of their busy Saturdays to join us and give us their amazing insights into their local government experience. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.